Right, Mr. Rowe, happy to continue?
Of course, sir.
Thank you very much. When you're ready, Mr. Millett.
Yes. Mr. Rowe, welcome back. Thanks for coming back to us. Can I just show you, still on the subject of plans, a passage in a statement which is already in evidence in the inquiry from Peter Johnson. And I wonder if that could be got up onto the screen at pages 14 and 15. And it's MET 000013235. And if we go to page 14 at the foot of the page, he says, soon after that, it's not exactly easy to find out, to see precisely when that is, he says there was another tactical coordination group meeting between various organisations, such as the Police, Housing, TfL, Water Authority, Council and others. During this meeting, AC Rowe had asked the Council to provide plans of the building, including the internal layout. It is vital we have plans, as mentioned when I was talking about 72D visits. There was no detailed, and then if we go over the page, information or comprehensive notes of the building layout from a London Fire Brigade aspect. All we had was a recent photograph. And if you just go down, 3 lines down, he says, the female representing the council said that she would get the internal layout plans for us and was working on it. About 45 minutes later, I went onto the incident ground and spoke to the same female asking for an update on these plans. She told me she had not yet found the plans and were still working on it. At a TCG meeting later that morning, AC Rowe asked the female for the plans again, and they still were not present. AC Rowe expressed that this will be a big thing, that when asked for one thing, the council could not provide it. This has slowed the crews down in accessing the incident. Now, I've shown you a lot of that, partly for context, but also because there's quite a bit in it. Do you remember a female employee of the council telling you that the plans were not yet available?
I don't remember it specifically being a woman, but I do remember, as I said earlier, repeatedly asking for plans to representatives of the council and becoming increasingly, if I'm honest, irritated by their inability to give them to me.
Right.
So I felt it was something I wanted the crews to have.
We're just trying to identify the person you spoke to, you see, and I just wondered if you could help us with that.
I'm so sorry, I can't. In the context of how many people I spoke to that night, which was considerable,
No, I understand.
I can't.
Do you know the names of any particular council employees you spoke to?
Other than what's recorded in the log, I can't. I don't hold the detail of specific names. I think probably the one name actually that does stick in my mind is John, the DSC, because I had regular contact with him.
Yes.
And I definitely asked him for plans as well, actually. So I'd asked him if he could get access to plans in his role as the dangerous structures engineer.
Right, okay. All right. Can I then ask you to be shown 2 short clips of video? And I should just say for everyone, these do not show any fire on the outside of the building. These are clips which was taken from body-worn footage of the police that we've got. And these particular clips are clips of meetings inside CU8. And if we could just play the first of those. We may have to play it twice. It's about 2 minutes long, but I will have some questions about it. The best thing to do is to see it all the way through first. And we'll need the volume up on full, I think.
So how many floors? So there's 24 floors.
How many flats are there?
5, and you're looking at from the 2nd to the 24th floor alike. And really that's effectively what it is now. Perhaps if you can give that situational brief outside the TCMC program handover. No, I can't, we can't do that now, mate, because it's well beyond those numbers. If anybody can brief you, that would be great.
Some confusion about the flat numbers. The flats per floor, there's 6 per floor.
Okay.
From the 5th floor up, and then the 4th floor up, the 6th floor, and then the 3 floors below that are 8.
Can I just confirm as well? I know, and we have been asking this for a very long time. Have they been given plans?
I haven't got any plans.
I've got repeatedly back through local authority. You know, I think this.
Yeah, as far as I'm aware, the guy from the TNO, the MD from the TNO, has got plans on his phone, and he was looking to ping them through to somebody. So,
for what it's worth, I've got a picture from the BA and control of the layout of a standard floor, but also we know which numbers the flats
sending
are.
it on a phone is no good for me. So, and I hate to say this, and please don't record this in the minutes, but having experienced the back end of the Lackenow inquiry, having been in charge of other major incidents, I'm telling you now that the fact you have not been able to get me a set of plans, actually as a set of plans, is a major deficiency and will be highlighted. So do your best to get someone else within the council to get those set of plans. If it comes back to this unit, we'll get it to the right people, because we have been asking.
I've got something going to of course trying to check on fire safety system, see if they can set something as a backup.
Let's do it as a backup. All right, that's everything from me. I haven't got any other business.
Right. I've shown you that in full without any adornment. We're going to look at it again, and I'm going to ask questions, Paul to stop, and I'll ask some questions as we go. It won't take too long. First of all, I should tell you, and everybody else looking at this, that the time mark on that needs to be put forward 1 hour. So this is at 7:29 into 7:30. The clip, in fact, is from, as adjusted, 7:29:06 to 7:30:54. That's the main period we want to look at. The second thing is, as you can see, it's body-worn footage from the police, and the police officer's head, as you can see, is on the left of the screen. This is clearly taken from his footage on his shoulder. This is Inspector Thatcher. If we can just start that again, Paul, please. And I'll ask you to stop and ask questions as we go.
So how many floors? There's 24 floors.
how many flats are there?
Pause there. Just pausing there. Are you asking the questions? How many floors?
I can't tell you because I can't see the context of the rest of that meeting. It seems like I'm mid-sentence or mid-question,
Yeah.
so I'm very sorry, but I can't, no.
Okay, we'll see if we can identify the people in this. First of all, who is the gentleman in the bottom right-hand corner with the grey hair?
I don't know his name, if you were to ask me now, but he was the representative from the local authority,
Right.
so I'd recognise him as the LALO, the local authority liaison officer.
Okay, and the officer with the closely cropped haircut and the glasses on his head looks to us like Tom Goodall.
Yeah, so Tom Goodall with the glasses on his perched on the top of his head is definitely Tom Goodall, because what I did notice is that I've asked him to give the FSG information.
Right. Do you know who the third individual is we see there in the middle?
Yes, that will be the LAS on-scene commander.
Okay, let's just continue.
And you're looking at from the 2nd to the 24th floor alive. And really that's effectively what it is now. Perhaps if you can give that situational brief outside the TCMC program. No, we can't do that now, mate, because it's well beyond those numbers. If anybody can brief you, that would be great.
Is that you speaking?
Yes.
Right. Continue, please.
Confused about the flat numbers. The flats per floor. There's 6 per floor.
Okay.
From the 5th floor up, and then the 4th floor up, a 6th floor, and then the 3 floors below that are 8.
Can I just confirm as well? I know, and we have been asking this for a very long time. Have they been given plans?
I haven't got any plans. I've got
repeatedly back through local authority. You know, I think this.
Yeah, as far as I'm aware, that the guy from the TNO, the MD from the TNO, has got plans on his phone, and he was looking to ping them through to somebody. So,
for what it's worth, I've got a picture from the BA and control of the layout of a standard floor, but also we know which numbers the flats are.
Sending it on a phone is no good for me. So, and I hate to say this, and please don't record this in the minutes, but having experienced the back end of the Lackenow inquiry, having been in charge of other major incidents, I'm telling you now that the fact you have not been able to get me a set of plans, actually as a set of plans, is a major deficiency and will be highlighted. So do your best to get someone else within the council to get those set of plans. If it comes back to this unit, we'll get it to the right people, because we have been asking.
I've got something going to of course trying to check on fire safety system, see if they can set something as a backup.
Let's do it as a backup. All right, that's everything.
Okay, we can stop at the natural end. Just a couple of questions. The first is, you can hear Tom Goodall giving some detail about the floors and flats per floor. Was that the first time you'd heard that detail?
No, not at all. I'd had detail around the disposition of the block and our progress within it from almost the start of my tenure in command at the incident.
Right. Then you go on. Sorry.
apologies. No.
Then
Yeah,
you go
that's
on
right.
to say that you didn't want this recorded in the minutes, but the absence of plans was a major deficiency and would be highlighted later. Why didn't you want it recorded in the minutes?
Because I wanted to explain the gravity of what was happening. I wanted to record the. I suppose at that point in the incident, I wanted to give them a chance to get us the plans, but I felt they weren't listening to me because I'd been asking repeatedly over time, and I just wanted to understand that he should understand this in context because of the nature of that incident, that people would be held accountable, and absolutely rightly so. That's the whole point of this process, and I felt that they had been entirely deficient in not making those plans available.
And I think we see from the next clip which is the second clip we've got. Now, this is also body-worn footage. Also, if one adjusts it forward an hour, Mr. Rowe, it's timed at 8:55:45 and it runs till 8:55. 54. Sorry, 54.
So thank you for in terms of actions for the last TCM, thanks for the plans, very helpful. Glad we got them so you can recall and receive them. One of the other actions.
Right, it's a very short clip. I'm sorry, I was trying to play it backwards. Perhaps we should just play it again.
So thank you for in terms of actions for the last TCM, thanks for the plans, very helpful. Glad we got them so you can recall and receive them. One of the other actions.
Right, now it's not that clear, but
I understood that.
you understood that.
So
What did you
I'm
understand?
saying thank you for the plans, and I think we've recorded that we've received them. Is that what I'm saying there?
Right. Well, should we listen to it one more time?
Yeah.
So thank you for in terms of actions for the last TCM, thanks for the plans, very helpful. Glad we got them so you can recall and receive them. One of the other actions.
Right. Now, having heard that, I think 3 times, can you confirm that that is you thanking whoever it was who provided them for
Yes.
the plans?
Yeah,
Right.
that's me thanking them for having completed that action.
Right. Now, 2 questions that arise from that. First of all, who provided them in the end? Do you know?
I can't tell you. It was a representative from the local authority. I can't tell you the individual.
Do you know where they got them from?
No, because again, that wasn't of my concern. I just wanted them.
Yeah. Now, we've seen the time mark here of 8:55, and the clip starts at 45 and runs to 54. This is 5 to 9 in the morning. How long before this time do you think those plans arrived, to your knowledge?
I couldn't tell you.
Right.
I genuinely couldn't tell you at that point.
Who told you that they'd arrived? Do you remember?
No.
Okay. Now, coming back to your progress on the night, I want to take it up at the bottom of page 6 of your first statement, please. The last paragraph starts with 3:39. Matt Cook and Andy O'Loughlin got onto the unit and gave me an update face to face. And just to match that up with your contemporaneous note, that is page 4 of that, and says pretty much the same thing. And at the bottom of that page, you say, after describing what you discussed with those 2 officers, I decided I needed to go to the tower lobby and make a decision as incident commander as to whether the continuing rescue effort was tenable in the face of such significant internal fire spread and such a significant external risk of partial collapse and the resulting debris. Now, had anything happened between the time you took over and then made the decision that the advice to those within the building should be changed, until this point, 3:39 and after, had anything changed so that you felt you now needed to make a decision as to whether the continuing rescue effort was tenable?
Yeah, it was the movement of the bridgehead that concerned me, because to move a bridgehead is a significant thing to do.
Right.
That bridgehead, it needs to be a stable environment where we continue to commit people into the building. To move it has a profound effect on the operation of search and rescue itself, because you're having to move the whole apparatus. So to do so is not a small decision. That told me that something must have deteriorated inside the building, I'd already come to the conclusion that the entire building system had failed, that we were putting firefighters at very high risk even just to get them into the building, to now find that not only perhaps were we not progressing in the way I hoped, but the bridgehead had shifted downwards. I really wanted to confirm myself exactly where we were at with matters.
And you still hadn't, I think, got a DSE on site at that stage?
We may well have done,
right.
But I can't remember.
Okay. Now, you then go to the tower, but you say in the next paragraph, on page 7, the commissioner arrived on the unit and I briefed her. Is that before you, I'm assuming, from the way this is laid out in your statement, that she arrived on the unit and you briefed her before you left to go to the tower to make the decision that you described. Is that right?
I'm not sure without seeing the order of things. So is this after I've gone to the tower and come back out?
Well, that's really what I'm asking you.
No, I can't tell from it happened quite quickly, so I can't see from the overall statement.
Okay, well, let's just look at the contemporaneous notes. This may clarify. Page 4, we have the first chunk of text, 339, where you say, as you do in your statement, that you needed to go to the tower to make a decision. And then in the next last block on that page, you say the commissioner arrived on the unit, I gave her a situational brief. And my question was, did she arrive on the unit before you left to the tower to make the decision that you say you wanted to go and make?
Yes, I think she did.
Right.
Apologies, I didn't quite understand your first question, but I do now.
That's okay. And you then left for the tower. And you left her on the unit, as you say, for continuity while you went out onto the incident ground. Did your logist stay in CU8?
Yes, so Jackie stayed on CU8 because in leaving the CU and having the commissioner arrive as the monitoring officer, effectively she was acting as the caretaker incident commander at that point, because it would have been difficult for me to communicate effectively as the incident commander from out on the incident ground. I needed someone to be in the place where all communications were coming into to be able to maintain an overall view of the incident while I went and sense-checked my situational awareness. That's normal practice in terms of that role.
Okay. Now, let's see if we can get a timing on this. Go to your log, please, if you would, your row log, as I call it, and you see that on page 2, you say, just below halfway down, still under the time mark of 0339, AR, that's you, I'm assuming that's you, it explains the command structure to MC and Commissioner. And MC, I imagine, is Matt Cook.
That's correct.
Did you not know the command structure at that stage?
I think that's just the way Jackie's noted it.
Oh, I see,
so I would have briefed the Commissioner. So I'll be directly briefing the Commissioner. So this is the first moment I'm aware the Commissioner is on the command unit with me.
Yeah.
And I am briefing her because she's my monitoring officer as to the structure of the instance, so she can validate my decision-making, confirm whether she's comfortable with the objectives I've set and the structure we were using to meet those objectives.
Okay. Then
Matt's an ORT officer standing next to her, and he would have received the same brief and actually would have provided a degree of objective critical challenge to it as well, potentially, because that's their role, regardless of rank, actually.
So you leave, after that briefing, you leave to go to the tower, and you leave Jackie McConaughey with the Commissioner on CU8. You can see the next item is 355, DT Super Gold to Commissioner, FSA to police to get out. Do you think you were on the command unit at that point, or had you already gone?
I think I'm off at that point because I think that refers to the blocks adjacent to the to Grenfell Tower. Apologies, is that Barrington Walk?
Or Treadgold House?
Yeah, one of those. But I think from what I remember, I came back onto the unit later, and I don't know whether it's recorded, to be told that the Commissioner had a conversation with the police representative, and that information was about residents in nearby blocks being at risk, and she had taken the decision that those blocks should be evacuated.
Okay, and then at 3:58 you can see she makes a command decision that EDBA be rewarned. Now, I'm assuming she was on the CU and you weren't at that stage.
No, but I was having, and actually I find some reassurance in this, in the sense that I was separately having that conversation, I think, about this time with Pat Goldborn, and I had come to the conclusion that EDBA would need to be reworn.
Right.
So I think we came to the same conclusion separately. I can't tell you what information gave the Commissioner reason to take that decision, because I wasn't on the unit.
No.
But I find some reassurance in the fact that our thought processes were the same, having subsequently read that record when I've returned to the unit.
Okay. Then I'm just trying to get a feel for when you came back onto the unit. Looking down the log at 406 AR sit rep on incident ground. Now Jackie wasn't with you on the incident ground, as you've told us. So how did that come to be in the log at 406?
No, that's just the way she's worded it. I think I'm back on the unit, and I think that refers to a situational report about the incident ground. She would not have been. At no point was Jackie with me on the incident ground. So for her to record that, that must have taken place back on the unit.
I follow. So can we, in terms of a spread of time, can we take it on the basis that you left the command unit at before perhaps just before 3:55 to go to the tower, but were back on the command unit by 4:06?
I think I might have left slightly earlier than 3:55 potentially, because I'm not sure it would have taken me that long to give the initial brief to the Commissioner, because I at that point, because of the news I'd had around the bridgehead coming down, I would have wanted to get out there and see that. So I think that would have been fairly quick, but it's certainly between 3:39 and 4:06 I've got off the unit, and I've spent some time off the unit to improve my situational awareness.
Right, okay, so at least we've got a spread of time when we know you're off the unit.
Absolutely, yeah.
At the most you say it's between 3:39, a little bit after that, and 4:06 when you come back on.
Yes.
All right.
I'd agree with that.
Now, during that period, I think you went to CU7. Is that right?
I can't remember exactly. I probably would have to refer back to my statement.
Yeah.
Well, I would have thought I did, because if I'm going past it, I would have taken the opportunity to stick my head into Tom Goodall and see how that was going. I would have wanted to take that opportunity en route to the tower.
Yeah, and we've covered this earlier this morning. It's page 5. I don't want to get back to that. Okay. It's just in terms of what you did on that tour. You go to CU7. Just so to be fair to you, I'll take you back to it again. Page 5 of the contemporaneous note, third item down, as we pass CU7. Third item down, as we passed CU7, I stepped on to take a short brief from Tom Goodall. How long do you think that brief lasted?
Probably a minute or 2 minutes. Right. It wouldn't have been a long brief.
No, and we discussed that yesterday,
yeah.
Which is where you said you were happy with their orderly system, but the word happy wasn't right.
Yeah, happy is not appropriate.
No. And then you went, I think, to BA Control, because that's what we have next, Dan Kipling and Nick Saunders. Where was BA Main Control?
So BA Main Control was on a grassed area in front of the tower.
Right. And did they give you any information about the sufficiency of EDBA supply at that point?
I can't remember the detail of the conversation, but what was clear to me that there was an obvious system in operation to prepare wearers to be committed into the tower, that there was clear holding points where people were either returning, being refreshed, got ready to be committed, and that there was a system under operation.
Right.
I didn't question them I don't think about turnover of EDBA at that point, but to be fair, I don't remember the detail of the conversation I had.
Okay. Following your tour, the next item down, you say, I then went to the base of the tower, and you got a brief from Dave O'Neill on safety. You see that? Now, I think we can pin this down with some CCTV image, which I think you might be able to help us with. Can I ask you, please, first to be shown INQ 387? This is a CCTV image taken from the Grenfell lobby camera 3 at adjusted time of 3:50:44. And can you see yourself in that picture?
I can. I'm standing near the signage that says Grenfell Tower Community Room, talking to an officer with their helmet off.
And that, with his arm pointing to the right?
Yes, that's right.
Do you know who that is?
I think that looks like Pete Wolfenden from behind.
Yes, I think we would agree with you. But right, does that help you identify the time at which you went into the tower on this tour?
Well, I would suggest that it was moments before that I got into the tower.
Right.
Because you had to sprint to get into the tower. Right. Although what I would say is that I'd been ready to go into the tower earlier than that. But obviously the incident involving the poor gentleman who had jumped from the tower had delayed that somewhat, because I'd had to deal with the immediacy of that as well.
I follow. Okay. And then the next picture is at an adjusted time of 03:55:54, which is INQ I've taken this slightly out of order, actually. I think the better order would be to show you, I'm so sorry, to show you 388, INQ 388. Now, can you see yourself in that picture?
Yes, I can.
And where are you?
I'm not entirely sure, to be honest with you. In the layout of that floor, that might have been the point where I came.
No, in the picture. Sorry, in the picture. Where are you in the
apologies. I'm on to the far right, and I believe that is Richard Welsh and Pat Goldborn I'm talking to.
Right. I see. And who is wearing the red checkered tabard?
That would be someone from the command unit.
Indeed. And who might that be? Do you know?
I have no idea.
No. Okay. Does the name Mark Kentfield ring a bell?
No, it doesn't. It doesn't ring a bell for me, because my focus would have been on talking to the sector commanders, because they held the situational information, the update I needed,
right,
and were responsible for the BA operations. It was very important to me that I got that information from them.
And you could, and I'm assuming that you could see what we can see from this picture, which was that the bridgehead was now down at the foot of the stairs on the ground floor there.
Yes.
That was BA entry control. That was the BA entry control point.
Yes.
Yes. Now, if we go on to INQ 391, you're still in the tower at this point, and this is at an adjusted time of 3:55:54. Do you think you can see yourself in that picture?
I think I'm leaving the tower at that point, and I'm walking past Pete Wolfenden, going out through the Grenfell Tower, past the Grenfell Tower community room sign.
Right, yes, thank you. So on the basis of those time marks, coming in at before 3:51, but not long before 3:51, as we've seen, 3:50, as we've seen, 3:50:44, and then leaving at an adjusted time of 3:55:54, does that help us identify the time span, more or less, that you were in the tower?
Yeah, I would say that's an accurate reflection. I think I was in there 4 or 5 minutes. I got the information I needed, and then I got out.
Right.
And went back out.
Right, that's helpful. During that period of 4 or 5 minutes you were in the tower, did you have a briefing with Pat Goulbourne and Richard Welsh?
Yes, I did.
You did. And where did you have that briefing?
I can't tell you exactly where. I can't locate myself exactly in the base of the tower. And I don't want to say it's at the base of the stairs, because I think because you've shown me that photo, it's the first time I've seen that photo, I might assume that. All I know is that I had a face-to-face briefing with Pat and Richard in the tower.
Right. Now, can I then, having established the time, see if we can establish the content of that briefing? Can I ask you please to go to page 8 of your first witness statement and look at the second paragraph there. You say, and just to set this in a wider context, this is in the part of your statement dealing with this tour out of the command unit. I received a quick update from Pat Goulbourne and Richard Welch, who were running the fire sector. And you go on to say, they told me they cleared as best as possible up to the 8th floor and were having to firefight hard to get beyond that, but had crews earlier in the incident well up beyond that to possibly the 20th and 21st floors. They were both calm and focused, with an immediate aim to fight through to the 12th floor, despite having intermittent issues with water supply due to burst branch stroke hydrant lengths as a result of falling debris or hoses getting burnt through. And then you go on, Pat confirmed we needed more EDBA, and I explained I'd asked for every EDBA asset in London. We discussed the stability of the building, and at that point we'd received no reports of issues with concrete superstructure, columns or floors. There's quite a lot in that I just want to unpack with you. First of all, was your impression at this time from this briefing that Pat Goulbourne and Richard Welch were doing a systematic search of each floor from the bottom up?
I can't remember the exact detail of the brief, but my view is that they were working their way systemically up the building,
Right.
because that was the nature of the questions I asked them and the information I received back. Right. So I was very focused on clearing as best we could, floor by floor, pushing up the building, because it's clear we've been pushed back down.
Do you know whether that was a system that they'd already started?
No, I don't. But I know that I needed them to push as hard as possible back up the building, clearing as they went.
Right. Do you know roughly when they'd started that systematic bottom-up approach?
Do you mean prior to my command?
Prior to your arrival in the building?
Inside the building? No, I don't.
Okay.
But what I would say is that the brief I'd had from Andy O'Loughlin was that he had Pat and Richard in there, and they were attempting to make progress as far as possible up inside the building. And that would have meant to me that they were clearing floor by floor, because that was generally the approach, and working simultaneously on the fire survival guidance calls as information came in.
What did you understand the EDBA wearers were being used for?
To project as high as possible into the building because of travel times,
Right.
but also for specific tasks where needed.
To your understanding from this briefing, were crews being committed to respond to particular FSG rescues, or was this just being done floor by floor?
No, they were definitely being specifically tasked.
Did you find out what would happen where an FSG call had come, where FSG details had come to the bridgehead for a floor above here, let's say the 8th floor? What were they doing with that information at the bridgehead, so far as you could see?
Well, I don't know if this was then, because again, obviously I was in command for a long period and had many conversations, but I do remember having a conversation about crews on the basis of a risk assessment, if necessary, being pushed above a fire floor without fire extinguishing media, which I found extremely concerning, but I felt I had to trust Pat and Richard, you know, in terms of their professional judgment and experience and having to do that to make best efforts to rescue people. I think that did happen. So that may well have happened in that conversation. I don't know whether it did or whether that was a later conversation. But my expectation would be that actually sometimes people were being pushed beyond where we were, you know, reasonably expecting to be able to control the fire.
Did you, in that, I know it was not a particularly long period of time you were there, but during that period, did you find out how FSG details were coming into the tower from outside at that point?
Well, I knew that already from the system that Tom had shown me, explained to me, from my own observation, because it was clear that sheets were coming in with me as I went into the tower, came back out of the tower. It was very clear there was a kind of linear system to bring them into the bottom of the tower. It was clear that information was being documented on the wall. It was clear that Pete Wolfenden, for example, was involved in that, as was a watch manager who I now know to be Glyn Williams, but I didn't know his name at the time.
Okay. So I
was satisfied there was a passage of information in.
Right. Did you look closely at the linear system?
When you say closely, no more than that I was comfortable that I could see sheets coming in, being given to crews, an element of briefing happening, and that then those crews were progressing to the bridgehead. So I was comfortable with that. And actually, again, I didn't want to get involved in that level of detail. I was more concerned about the fact the bridgehead had moved, that raised a greater question for me about the firefighting conditions internally, and most importantly, my decision around the risk I was placing firefighters.
Right.
That was of the greatest concern to me at that point. Was I still able to commit firefighters reasonably into this building, taking into account the conditions?
Yeah. Can I just pick something out of your last answer? You very helpfully said that you could see sheets coming in, being given to crews. Could you just explain what you saw? Sheets of paper with what? FSG on them?
Yes, so our template sheet. So I remember being outside,
Yes.
lining up to go to the parapet just before Sean Murphy was hit by the gentleman who jumped. And I remember to my left someone collating sheets, and then someone bringing. I just remember seeing the sheets, and then I remember seeing sheets inside.
Yes.
And I remember the information written on the wall, and that there was clearly communication between all parties involved in that kind of linear delivery of information.
Did you see the watch managers, the officers, at the wall giving sheets of paper with FSG information on them to crews?
I can't remember in the exactitude of that detail, but my memory is that information, I must have some memory of it, because I have memory of that information. I've seen that information inside the tower.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. And do you remember, I know it's difficult, but do you remember the crews holding those pieces of paper when going to the entry control?
I would just not have been looking at that level of detail. I couldn't tell you faithfully that I do remember that.
No.
But what I do remember for definite is the information going into the tower, there being a method of recording, and that there were sheets inside the tower.
And do you remember
who was holding them? I'm sorry, I can't remember the exact detail.
Do you remember discussing with Richard Welch or Pat Goulbourne whether those sheets that you saw were being used for briefing crews by them?
No, I didn't delve down into that level of detail, because my primary concern at that point was, why have we had to move the bridgehead? Are we now operating in conditions that are becoming increasingly untenable? What is your resourcing requirement? How far are we able actually to push up inside the building? What is the likely rate of progress as well? And if I'm honest, to be absolutely clear in my intent that we continued, regardless of the difficulties, to carry out BA search and rescue conditions despite, operations despite the difficulties, and to impress on them my desire that they push momentum as hard as possible. It was a conversation more in that context. It was the big picture, which is, Pat, Richard, are you able to continue operations? Have you got any specific information about the stability of the building? Where are we in the building? Why have we moved the bridgehead? We need to drive that back up, and we need to move back up the building.
Right.
It was about maintaining, because my great fear throughout the incident is that people were scared, people were traumatised. It was a massive logistical effort to keep the operation going. My primary focus was we had to maintain progress. Progress was not a given. Progress had to be driven and motivated through the leadership of individual officers, through the courage and tenacity of firefighters themselves. And actually, that had to be my focus. It had to be the big picture to drive that momentum, drive the progress through. Right. So I'm there to set strategy. My command officers are there to define the detail of the tactics, which in some aspects I would have to validate. And the firefighters are there to deliver the tactics. And that's kind of how the incident command structure works, in effect. So for me, it was more important to me that we were meeting our broad strategic objectives at that incident, which is we must continue to drive progress inside the tower despite the difficulties, but I need to have an adult conversation about whether it was safe to do so, recognising the very great moral dilemma that would put me in if I decided to remove crews from the building.
Right. And just looking at what you said in that last answer about the command officers defining the detail of the tactics, did you question them about why, when designing those tactics, they hadn't already pushed the EDBA resources they had as far up into the building at an earlier stage than now?
I don't know whether I had a conversation about EDBA then or later, but there was certainly a point in the incident where I wanted to know why we weren't balancing the use of SDBA and EDBA differently. Now, I think I had that conversation on the unit and asked for the message to be passed back. So I wanted to know why we weren't pushing EDBA as far as we could up within the building, backfilling with SDBA to the point where its limit of exploitation was exhausted. So I definitely had that conversation at some point in the incident.
Do you remember when?
I'm really sorry, Mr. Millett, I don't.
Right. And do you know what happened to that suggestion that you made?
Yes, I think that either Matt Cook or Mick Mulholland took that and took that to the fire sector, because I'm sure I asked that on more than one occasion.
And the result of that request was what?
Some clarification about how we were using EDBA and why we needed the EDBA resources, which was to push up as far as we could into the tower. Right. And so at one point we were only using EDBA. That's what prompted that question, actually. So that was the point at which I asked it. There was a point in the incident when we were only using EDBA. I was given some rationale for why that was, but my answer to that was, that's fine if that's what you think is required at this moment in time due to the circumstances, the conditions. But at the earliest opportunity, and I do remember having this conversation, and I'm sorry, I can't exactly remember the location, is that we needed to get back to a place where we were using EDBA with maximum efficiency and pushing SDBA up behind it.
Do you remember being told about deployments of EDBA to low floors, for example, the 4th floor?
I may well have been. That wouldn't necessarily have concerned me if it was focused on undertaking a particular task, because EDBA isn't just about distance of travel, it's about duration of wear. So, you know, there are certainly tasks on the incident ground where you don't want a constant rotation of crews, but actually that is always balanced with the effects of heat and fire on our own crews. You know, it's a delicate decision to take because you don't necessarily want to overexpose people either. But I would be trusting Pat in the minutiae or Richard in the minutiae of those decisions if it was task focused. But as a general principle, I was very clear that we needed to use SDBA as far as possible to reach the upper floors of the building and drive SDBA in behind it.
Well, can I ask you to be shown a picture which is MET 5774, which is a close-up, well, I think the best picture we've got, of the lobby wall, which is there on the screen now. And can I just ask you to look at the top of that? Pete Wolfenden wrote on that, above 10 EDBA, below 10 SDBA. Can you tell us anything about that?
Well, I don't remember reading that. The only thing I can say about that wall and the boards inside the FSG command unit was that I'd asked them to be photographed repeatedly as information came to act as a record,
yes, so
that actually, you know, there would be an opportunity to question it at a later date and see if there's any learning coming from it.
All right. Do you remember issuing a command, or one of the sectors issuing a command and telling you about it, that above 10 EDBA, below 10 SDBA?
I don't remember the specific numbers, but I do remember more than one conversation about use of SDBA and EDBA and where the limits of exploitation for each were.
Right.
I don't remember the specifics of the floor numbers because these things ebbed and flowed continuously over the duration of the incident.
Right. And do you remember anybody writing a grid on the wall at a later stage in the evening showing what floors had been cleared?
I can't say I remember the exact detail of what was written on the wall, but I remember a range of information being written on the wall, right, and just reflecting that actually this was a sign of how extremely difficult things had become, because the very processes we'd put in place post-Slackenau to prevent that ever happening again had seemingly not been adequate.
Well, and I'll come back to that in a minute, if I may, because I'm interested in that answer. But before I do that, just following your tour, I think after as we've seen, after this brief visit, 4 or 5, 6 minutes or so, to the tower, you go back to the command unit. Is that right?
That's correct.
And I think you then go back to the tower again at 4:20. And the reason I suggest that to you is that you say that in your statement at page 9, last paragraph. At 4:20, I went back inside the tower to the lobby. I was briefed by Pat and Richard. I asked them to start using SDBA to follow behind the EDBA crews to make the best use of resources. Now that is you've got that as a separate discussion at 4:20. Do you think that's right? First of all?
That's obviously what I recollected.
Right. Now, let's just see if we can pin this down with right, that's what you recollect. I don't think we've got a CCTV image of you coming in at that stage. It doesn't matter. But you're sure that that's not part of the same discussion you had earlier in the tower, the one we talked about?
I can't recollect, but what I do know is that I absolutely had that conversation, because that's the conversation, actually reading that's the conversation, one of the conversations I'm referring to. Right. Which is that I needed SCBA, because I was concerned that we were asking EDBA wearers to wear twice. You know, I accepted that we had to do that, but I wanted to minimise the repeated wearing of EDBA because of the duration of the set. And it was just the most efficient way to use our resources. We had a greater number and greater availability in terms of relief or bringing additional machines on of SDBA, right, and therefore I wanted to use that as efficiently as possible to its maximum level of usage and reserve EDBA for those tasks that were absolutely vital for EDBA to be used for.
Yeah. The reason I'm asking you this rather arcane question is because if you go to your statement on page 9, you say that this is the 4:20 briefing, that you have it. You say halfway down the page, I put There was one watch manager who was writing up FSG information on the wall. He was close to tears and tried to apologise for doing so. I put my arm around him and gave him reassurances. Now, we do have a picture which I just want to show you, which is INQ 390, which is camera 4, INQ 390, Paul, which is camera 4 in the lobby, with an adjusted time mark of 03:55:47. So that's during the period of your first trip we looked at before. And if you look at, well, help me with this. Can you see you in that picture?
I can. I've got my arm around someone I now know to be Glyn Williams.
Right.
And I can definitively remember that conversation because he was distraught that he was having to write things on the wall.
Right.
And I just felt appalled for him because he was clearly a professional officer who was trying to do his best and was trying to, make excuses for his own actions in the face of what was just incredible pressure. And I wanted him to know that as the incident commander, I knew he was doing his best and that he was making every effort to record information in the face of a system that had basically failed him.
I have one more question, then we can take a break, if I may just ask it. Given that we've identified that as the conversation, do you think now that the time mark in your statement of 4:20 on page 9 is incorrect, and that in fact
it must be, because I didn't have that conversation more than once, so I can only reflect that that's the case. It must have been all part of the same journey into the tower.
Yes, I see. Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, I think it is appropriate if we take a break now.
Yes.
I'm doing very well. Just to ask.
In that case, we'll have a break. Right,
Well, for time, anyway.
I'm out slightly different.
we'll have a break, Mr. Rowe.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
I think we're probably safe to say 3 o'clock, aren't we, Mr. Millett?
Feeling generous. Yes.
Thank you, sir.
3 o'clock, and no discussing your evidence, please.
Sir.
All right, you'd like to go to the usher? Thank you. Good. 3 o'clock, please. Right, all ready to carry on.
Sir.
Mr. Rowe, thank you for coming back. Can I just ask you to go back very, very briefly to one or two things we were talking about earlier before? First of all, in terms of asking for plans, at the point at which you took over, were you aware whether Control or anybody else in the brigade had asked RBKC for plans or not?
I wasn't, no.
Right. Similarly, on a related topic, were you aware whether anybody in the at Control had asked RBKC for a dangerous structures engineer?
I think I was aware that a dangerous structure engineer had been requested, because I think that was part of Andy O'Loughlin's brief to me.
Yes.
I believe that Andy had made that request.
Right.
That's what I recollect. So I was confident that a DSC had been requested.
Okay. Going back to the discussion about strategy, which just before the break you very helpfully told us was the one during your visit to the tower just before 3 a.m. or around about that time. Did you have any discussion with Richard Welch or Pat Goulbourne about the need to make sure that firefighters, when they got to floors, knocked on all the doors on the floors to alert any occupants who remained in their flats?
No, again, I didn't go down to that level of granular detail in terms of tactical delivery. For me, it was the bigger strategic question, which was, can we maintain this rescue operation in the face of the conditions inside the tower? It was very, in a very real sense, can we continue to commit crews? And if we are continuing to commit crews, how far can we get them? Yeah. That was the question I needed answered at my level.
Yes. There is also just one thing I just need to clarify with you. In your evidence this afternoon, and at the moment it's on the electronic version of the transcript, page 156, line 24, you said you needed SDBA as far as possible to reach the upper floors. Did you mean EDBA?
EDBA, yes. So EDBA would have been used for the furthest penetration you could to the higher floors, yeah, and SDBA following up behind. Now,
you have described in your witness statement at page 9, which is where we, I think, left off, and we've clarified the time mark there, but just going back to the substance of the discussion, page 9, last paragraph, you discuss the FSG writing on the wall there. Can I just ask you to look at the PRC notes, which is LFB 3112, and go please to page 5. Now, in the middle of this is back to the discussion that you were having on that day as part of the review. And in the middle of that page, it says, not so happy with China graph writing on walls, indication couldn't get on FIBs, and indication of where we'd got to. I just want to explore what that is about. What were your concerns about China graph writing on wall?
I think exactly what I've described previously, which I saw it as an example of a system we put in place to address a previously identified point of learning post-Lacanau, having not been sufficient to deal with the fire survival guidance calls in the volume we were receiving them. And obviously, I mean, that was what drove me to ask Tom and whatever officer I did ask inside the tower to repeatedly photograph the boards, because my great concern with China graph on walls in a firefighting environment where there might be water, in an environment where you have a lot of people, is you can start to erode that information, and you run a real danger of that information being rubbed by someone inadvertently, of losing it in some way. So that really concerned me. That's exactly why we wanted to have the fib board system, so that people didn't have to resort to writing information on walls.
Was your concern with not using the fib board system also, was it to do with the amount of information that wasn't being recorded? But let me put the question slightly differently. Start at ticketed stages. Under the fib board system, which was brought in, which I think is policy 820, do you remember that there's an appendix which sets out a template with a whole lot of detail about what should go onto a fib?
Yes, absolutely. So the good thing about a fib board is it gives you a structure on which to record the information. Now, obviously, at the point that you're deviating from using the fib board, and again, so these are people who are under high stress, very high volume of information. They are now having to write on the wall that information. You know, they haven't got the you know, just the visual structure of a fib board to work to. You know, I'm fairly sure that they would have tried to recreate it on the wall. However, there is a risk that actually it's not going to be done in such a structured way. I think that is inevitable when you are writing things on a wall. They would have done their absolute best. So there is no intended criticism of the junior officers involved. They were doing their best in a context of a great volume of information with the fib boards not having had the space.
Well,
I would not be happy in that context.
Okay, let's just see if we can get a little bit more granularity on that answer. Can I ask you to please to be shown a policy 820, which is LFB 188. It's a tab 19 of our policy bundle. And go to page 9 of the relativity reference, which is figure 3 in appendix 1. And this is some way into the document. Now, Mr. Rowe, tell me if you're not familiar with this.
No, I am familiar with the casualty information template.
I don't know whether this can be blown up so that you can see the detail on the left-hand side. It's not terribly clear. But there's a lot of detail down that left-hand side. For my purposes, you don't need to know what it is. It was your concern about using the China graph that this particular detail wasn't being captured on the wall per FSG?
No, not to the level of granular detail, because actually in the context of the volume of calls they had, actually I'm not sure they'd have been able to capture the full range of information this template encapsulates. But it's just the simple fact that this is neat, it is ordered, there are columns, you know, you can clearly read across, whereas inevitably if you're writing freehand on a wall with China graph and in the volume of information that was going on there, I mean, I think I was very concerned that we got to that point. It told me, I suppose, from my perspective, because I'm always looking at my perspective from the story of, you know, the bigger story of the incident. And what it told me was that our systems had been outstripped by the volume of information coming in.
Right.
And my officers were having to improvise in a way that I didn't find entirely satisfactory, but that they had no choice, because realistically there was nowhere else to record that information in terms of space and the equipment they had available. So therefore they were doing their utmost best to capture vital information that was going to help progress the rescue effort.
Right. But the concern was, the specific concern was what? That the information would be deleted or not captured in some way?
I don't think it's as specific as that. It's just that, you know, I think by any measure, having to write something on a wall in regard to casualty information, people coming out of the flats, it's just not going to be it's not going to be captured in as clear and as neat a way, and in a way that is so it was more likely to be erased for a start. That was my reason for asking for repeated photos to be taken, in case even within the compass of the incident, we might have had to have gone back to find some information if that was required.
Okay. So would it be fair to describe your concern here that the post-Lacanau policy had been tested to destruction and found wanting?
Absolutely. I think that's an absolutely fair description of where we'd got to.
Okay. Now, you then, I think, go back to CU8, and you've helpfully assisted us with that at 406. We're there. It's page 2 of your log, and you then have a meeting. I'm so sorry, let me find it myself. You then have a TCM, I think, that was initially chaired by Commissioner Cotton at 4:34. And if you go to your log, we will see that. And it's just below halfway down the page. Do you see that? It's page 3.
So I think we're on page 2 here?
We are, and we should be. We should be on page 3. 0434, Tactical Coordination Meeting. Commissioner introduces and establishes priorities in AR absence. Now, it's the absence I just want to, first of all, to clarify with you. Going back one page, you told us earlier on to page 2 that by 4:06 you'd come onto the CU, because you had that sit rep about the incident ground. That was why it was logged by Jackie. Yes?
Yes.
Yes, and then you give a brief to Lee Drawbridge at 4:11.
Yep.
And then 4:12, there are various other entries, and same at 4:22. You're not, it appears, referred to after 4:12, or between 4:12 and 434,
So
where Commissioner introduces and establishes priorities in AR absence. My question is, although you came back onto the CU at before 406, when did you leave again? Because you clearly did.
I went to brief Lee Drawbridge. So
I see.
I think that's when I went to brief Lee Drawbridge. But I would need to look. May I just look back through the timeline, because I remember briefing the Commissioner
Yes.
and then wanting to go and speak to Lee Drawbridge in person. It was very important to me that I spoke to Lee in person, so I had to get over to CU1 where he was going to be.
I see.
To brief him face to face.
Right. So we can
I think
I
it's
can
that
help
part
you.
of the incident.
Let me help you with that. We can pick this up, I think, at page 6 of your contemporaneous note. At the bottom of the page, at 411, you're told that Lee Drawbridge is on CU1, and then at the top of 7, you go to CU1.
Yeah. So I think that period reflects me going to see Lee, and my recollection was that I went into the tower on the way back.
Right.
But I think the footage you've shown me, because I think this is the point where I'd said I'd put my arm around Glyn Williams, but clearly I'd done that at 3:58,
Okay.
or whenever the timestamp was of that
Right.
particular visit to the tower.
Okay. Well, to be fair to you, because it's not that clear, and we're just trying to piece this together,
No, absolutely, I understand why you need to do this.
you and I. On page 7 of your contemporaneous note, you say, I made my way to CU1, and then in the third item down, you say, I walked back to CU8 via the tower. I once again got a quick situational update from Andy O'Loughlin. Now, did you go into the tower to have that situational update from him?
No, Andy I met outside. I didn't have I don't think I had a conversation with Andy inside the
Got
tower.
it. So, okay, so then you then say, I waited for an MPS officer, went back into the lobby, and that's 420, briefed
that was
by
the best
Pat and
of my
Richard.
memory, yeah.
So we've obviously got a question of recollection here. Really the question is your recollection that you've given us today correct, or are these contemporaneous notes the more reliable?
I don't think I can tell you, genuinely, because I think I was in command of the incident for such a long time that I've tried to piece together my memory of the incident based on the timings that were recorded for me, decisions that were recorded for me, whether it was ordering on resources. My memory says that I walked back from the tower, walked back from the CU1 where I'd spoken to Lee via the tower. My memory says that I went into the tower.
Yeah.
But I can't argue with the CCTV footage I've seen for the first time today. So the truth is, I can't quite piece together how that has happened. Now, my memory still tells me I went into the tower, but your CCTV tells me that the actions I thought I carried out in the tower at that point had in fact occurred perhaps as part of a previous visit. I think that's probably just a function of memory and of having been in charge of a very complex incident over such a long period of time and doing my best to remember.
Yeah. Right. Now, going back to the row log, 0434, page 3, sorry, I'm so sorry. There's something I want to cover with you before that. At 422, Mick Mulholland gives update. Do you see that up there? Just should cover that with you first, actually. Crews up to 10th floor in EDBA, SDBA 4th and 5th floors, 7th and 8th and 9th floors considering using aerial. EDBA is being used quickly. Andy O'Loughlin, no active FSGs at this time, and last were on 7th, 8th and 9th floors. Crews in and out is compromised by debris drop down and several casualties jumping. Now, this is 422. Do I take it that you weren't on the CU at that time and not privy to that discussion?
No, because I came back onto the unit at the point the Commissioner had started to chair the SCG. I came literally just as she was starting it. She'd done the introduction.
Yep.
She'd laid out some priorities, probably based on that SITREP, to be fair, in the conversation I'd had with her before I left.
Right.
And then I took over the chairing of the TCM so that she could resume her monitoring officer duties and actually also pick up some other functions which were beginning to bring some pressure to bear on the incident.
Okay. Did you get any information from Andy O'Loughlin or anybody after 422 that at 422 there were no active FSGs?
I didn't have that information at that point, but I think I got onto the unit at the point that the Commissioner was giving an update. And also I'd picked up on some information somewhere on that journey. That's why I think I went to the tower, because I remember that TCM and talking about progress. Now, whether I picked that up from the brief Andy O'Loughlin had given me, that may well have been the case, because that brief was face-to-face.
Right.
I think where Andy O'Loughlin is referred to there, I don't know whether he's on the unit at that time because he's done the briefing with me and then moved on, or whether that's Mick passing Andy's information on, because obviously I wasn't on the unit. I don't know whether that was just Mick on the unit speaking on behalf of Andy, so passing his update on. I have no idea, because obviously I wasn't there.
Right. Now, it looks from your contemporaneous note that you went back to CU8 via the tower, possibly went into the lobby again, went back to CU8, and on the way back checked on BA main control. Do you think go into CU7 on the way back to CU8?
I think I did, because wherever possible I would stick my head into CU7 to see how FSG was doing.
Yeah.
And the one thing I do remember is speaking to, I'm fairly sure I spoke to large numbers of BA crews again, coming through BA main control. Well,
let me see if something's familiar to you. Can I ask you, please, to look at MET 00015936. Now, this is a whiteboard on CU7 that we've heard quite a lot about. And I just want to look with you at the black writing a third of the way down on the right-hand side, where it says, from SM Wolfenden, at 4:25, BA crews committed to the 15th floor. And then underneath it, it says, at 4:45, crews only committed up to 11th floor, not 15th floor. Taking each in turn, do you remember finding out either then or after then that at 4:25, crews were being committed to the 15th floor?
I don't remember picking that information up off CU7 at that point, because I've delivered information from wherever I'd gathered it differently inside the TCM. So if I'd seen that information and registered it, and then walked a very short distance from CU7 to CU8, I would have used that set against the timings. But I mean, actually, I don't see. If I think about the timings of the TCM, that doesn't seem to square with the timings. Sorry, you've confused me slightly here, because the first one would be relevant, the 4:25, but not the 4:45, because I think I'd started the TCM by 4:30. Was it 4:35?
Well, if we go to page 3,
commission, you know, it literally was at the start of it. I got back on.
Well, yes, it's 4:34. If we go to page 3 of the row log, I'm just asking you about the first one, 4:25.
Okay, sorry, I just wanted to clarify that for my own understanding.
No, fair enough. My question really is, did before coming back onto CU8 and seeing and engaging in the start of the next TCM at 4:34, did you pass CU7? And I'm just trying to work out whether, if you did, whether you saw the whiteboard.
I would have looked at the system rather than the details on the whiteboard. Right. I wouldn't have interrogated it. I would have been more interested in FSG numbers, progress of the FSG operation. How was Tom? How was he? How were his staff? How were they coping with the demands of that system?
Right.
That would have been the line of questioning, and whether he thought we were still maintaining a clear line of communication into the BA crews.
Right. Turning to a different topic, a little bit later on in the night, if I can take you then to the row log, page 4. At 5:20, we see a number of things, but 4 lines down you say, AR, is wet riser up and running? Did you think that there was a wet riser in the building?
No, it's clear from the start there was a dry riser.
Do you know why it says wet riser?
I have no idea.
Right.
But you know, I was quite busy throughout the night.
Sure.
And I probably made a grammatical error, but I was very clear as a dry riser, because one of our issues was the continuing challenge of augmenting it in the face of hose lines being cut continuously by falling debris.
Yes, and we may look at that in just a moment. But just before I leave this wet riser point, can I ask you to look at page 5? At the top of the page, and it's, I think, 10 minutes later. No, half an hour later, 5:50. 5:50. Tom Goodall, wet riser is poor. Were you present for that when he said that, do you think?
I can't remember that sentence, but again, right. You know, I was in no doubt there was a dry riser. Right. There was a dry rising system.
Do you remember any sense of perhaps confusion on the night as to whether there may have been a wet riser in the building?
No, not from my perspective. It was very clear as a dry riser because
Right.
we were augmenting supply, and actually we had intermittent problems with water supply because of the challenge of hose lines being cut, the volume of water we needed, and the ability of Thames Water to supply sufficient pressure through the main system to supply those needs.
Right. Now, also at 5:50, just immediately under that, we see that there's the next tactical coordination meeting. I assume you chair that. 5:50.
Yes. If it doesn't say otherwise, yes.
No, and by then you've got crews up to the 14th floor. Danger for our crews, no water. There may be a decision not to commit above 14th floor due to risk. And then you get an update of FSG, which we looked at before this morning. And then you say, a bit lower down, 115 unaccounted for, very difficult to establish exact numbers due to self-evac. Now, that self-evac problem, can I just explore that with you? Did you know that people were exiting the tower, even in the early stages of the incident, without a record being taken of which flat or even which floor they'd come from?
Yes.
At what point did you learn that?
I think from the start of the incident, because it was obvious
Right.
that people had been leaving that building, as you would absolutely expect residents to have done so the minute they had any cognizance of how serious the fire was.
Yeah. Did you take any steps to put in place a system for recording that information from either from crews or from residents who were able to give that information as they exited?
Well, as they came out of the tower
Yeah.
during my time in command, I
Yes.
would have expected a record as far as was possible to be kept of anyone coming out of the tower. That is encompassed within the FSG system. Whether they rescued themselves, in effect, walking out of it, or whether our crews guided them out, I would see them as someone incorporated within the FSG system. So that 115, I think I do remember the detail of this. This was a conversation where I was trying to press Tom for, you know, who we thought was unaccounted for within those numbers. And I think that was my recollection is that was his best estimate, but that was very difficult to come to because of the issue around people having come out prior to not just me taking over, but throughout the entire kind of compass of the incident, because of the nature of the tempo of operations and the gap I've already highlighted in returning information. We were chasing that information the whole incident.
Right. So my question was, did you take any steps to put in place a system for recording that information?
I wouldn't have expected anyone to be coming out of the tower without their deed. That again is a tactical decision that I would have expected when we're following our processes and following our fire survival guidance processes to have recorded the names and disposition of the people coming out of the tower. And I suppose the fallback to that is I would have expected those people also to be picked up at some point within rest centres, within the system to gather casualties once they come out of the tower beyond our cordons as well. So there was a number of sources of information where I felt we could have all been working together as agencies to start piecing that information together.
Yeah. Sorry, perhaps I'm not being very clear. Given that you knew from the start that identifying who was coming out, which flat they were coming from, which floor they were coming from was difficult. My question really is, knowing that it was difficult, did you put in place or try to put in place a system for recording that information?
That is the FSG system. So what I'm saying is my belief in that crews were doing their best to do so is that as part of the FSG system, it's anyone coming out of that building. We needed to make a record of anyone coming out of that building having put that system in place.
What was that record?
So the record would have been, unfortunately, what Glyn is writing on the wall.
Right.
Because this is the information of anyone exiting the building, whether we're carrying them out or whether they've been able to walk down themselves or whether a BA crew has assisted them out. Anyone leaving that building, there was only one point of entry or exit. I would have expected that information to be recorded as part of a single system. If we'd put in place a separate system to collect that information, that would have made things even more complicated. So it's encompassed within the whole fire survival guidance system as laid down in our policy. What was clear to me was that was very, very, very difficult, and that's how we'd ended up in a place where information was being written on a wall in Chinograph. But I would have expected that return. It's part of the return loop we've discussed previously.
And I think it follows from your last answer, but was the system working?
Not in entirety, because of the volume of calls, because of the level of BA operation, because of the stress and level of effort that firefighters and officers were under, and the length of time they were having to undertake those duties. I think I had to be realistic that with the scale, the complexity, the awful nature of the incident, things were not always going to go exactly as I wanted it. And my job as an incident commander was always trying to come back to drive progress and to try and close the gaps where we could.
Can I then turn on to a different topic, which we find on page 14 of your statement, first statement, the foot of the page. You say, at 6:42, BCC, Brigade Control, offered me a 42-metre aerial appliance from Surrey FRS. I accepted the, I think, offer, that should say, and asked it to mobilise. This was with a view to replace our ALP, which only has a 30-metre reach. I just want to focus on that for a moment. Did you know, before BCC told you about it, that Surrey had a 42-metre aerial?
No, I did not.
Did it come as a surprise to you?
Yes.
Did it come as a surprise to you that the LFB did not have one?
No, because I know how our aerials operate, how many we've got, and to what height they operate to.
Right. Did you know whether any other FRSs within the M25 or just outside the M25 had a 42-metre ladder?
No, I didn't. And to be fair, when I was offered this, again, I suppose it's a general approach, which was actually having been offered it, I might have found a utility for it. I didn't see at that point any reason to turn the offer down. It wouldn't have been used for external firefighting because that wasn't our concern at that point. What I thought it might offer me is some advantage in terms of being able to look at the external condition of the building at height and might be able to offer some flexibility with that over a 30-metre aerial ladder platform.
Yes, and you say some flexibility with it. For doing what with?
In terms of just being able to get higher, perhaps the way we positioned it. I hadn't seen the machine, so I wasn't sure how it was going to be sited,
right.
Whether we could get it in, because obviously we don't have it as a piece of kit. But again, it wasn't something I was going to refuse, because having been offered it, and now having found out the one did exist, I could see that we might have a use for it, so I welcomed the offer and asked for it to come.
Right. What effect would the presence of a 42-metre ladder such as Surrey had on exterior firefighting had it attended at an earlier stage of the incident? Or perhaps at the start of the incident?
Again, I think it's very difficult for me to answer that in hindsight, but my gut feeling is absolutely none, because I think the way that fire spread, it was almost like a petrol fire. There was something very wrong about the way it spread externally. I'm not sure that the water supplied through a single aerial appliance would have been sufficient to stop the progress of it, actually. I very much doubt that, because it was spreading vertically, laterally and downwards because of the nature of the clad material. So I'm not sure it would have made a huge difference.
Right. Did you actually observe for yourself the effect of the exterior jets on the progress of the fire at any stage of the incident?
Yes, when I'd walked about, and it was negligible.
Can you just explain why you say it was negligible?
Because the way the jet, I can only explain it in the scale of the fire. So the jets were hitting the building, but they weren't noticeably reducing the spread or the ferocity of the fire as I saw it. What was obvious to me was that there was going to come a point when the combustible material had burnt itself out.
Do okay, turning to the question of fire lifts, the bottom of your page 7 of your second witness statement, if I can ask you to go to that. You refer there to, and it's about halfway down the paragraph, earlier in the incident, the fire lift and smoke management system, if functioning, would have assisted in addressing the incident. I just want to ask, just to focus on the fire lift, what assumptions, or thoughts perhaps is a better word, did you have about whether this building actually had what you refer to as a fire lift?
Oh, well, it's a requirement in a building of that kind that we would have access to the lift that we would have sole control of for the purposes of moving people and equipment. And obviously on a building the scale of Grenfell, that's invaluable in getting our resources to a point as quickly and as efficiently as possible without people having to exhaust themselves carrying it up many, kit in particular, up many flights of stairs.
Do you know at what point in the incident the fire lift would have ceased assisting, if it had been working?
No, I think it's impossible for me to judge that because I would have had to have been present at that stage of the incident to judge the point at which actually the fire lift would no longer really have been a factor in progressing the incident, and nor actually do I know at what point it failed. I just know that when I came and took over, the fire lift was not in operation, and actually I have to say, even if it had been, I'm not sure we would have been using it, because I think the changing conditions on every floor was such that you're making a judgment about using the fire lift to arrive at a floor, probably a floor below where you want to attack the fire. Whereas actually I think the nature of that fire internally and externally, in the way it was spreading, moving, changing, was that it had been very difficult to judge where you were safely sending firefighters to. The only way really to safely progress through that building was up through the stairs, judging conditions as you went. Obviously, if you're in a fire lift, even though that's a protected shaft and lift, you run the risk at the point where you've got fire spread to the extent of Grenfell of getting out into a very, very dangerous situation. So I'm not sure we'd have been using the fire lift very much anyway at the point I took over, even if it had been functioning.
Okay. Can I then ask you about field telephones? Now, don't look puzzled.
No, you're referring to the Mattel telephone system.
Yes, you're onto it. Can I just ask you, is there a practical reason why those weren't used on the night to connect the command unit, either CU7 or CU8, with the bridgehead?
I think the likelihood of that system operating effectively would be unlikely, and I have to admit, I thought we had stopped carrying those on the command unit, the Mattel telephone system.
What led you to think that?
I can't tell you.
I'm not saying you're wrong, but what led you to think that?
It's just something I remember, but I also do remember having used them in training, and my experience of them would have been an extremely tricky environment to run a field telephone system. You would have effectively been having to run it into the building by the same route we were making access. It's a long run, you're upstairs, it represents to a degree a trip hazard in what is already a very crowded environment. So I'm not sure that would have been a suitable solution to that issue.
Right.
Not when we had mobile phones, which people were using as well.
Okay. Leaving aside the trip hazard of the physical difficulties of laying the line as you've described, if it had been available, would it have helped in assisting the communications, reliable, clear communications? Not
in my opinion, no. What we needed to do was make better use of available airwaves, so not having it locked in people's cars, to have had Channel 2 set up and working, and where necessary, make best use of mobile phones. I think those are all more effective forms of communication than the Mattel field telephone system.
Right. Right. Yes. Just one or two questions on the DSE. We've just had a little discussion about that before. We'll just have a little bit more. Can I ask you, please, to be shown the IMP, the incident report at Master Docs 30, tab 30, which is LFB. Should have it. And if you go to page 2, please. We looked at this earlier this morning in the context of the heli-telly. If you look again at page 2, four entries up from the bottom of the page, still under development, we can see that the author has put in one of three items relating to the dangerous structure engineer. Dangerous structure engineers, DSE, could not provide an adequate assessment on risk areas, and there was a delay in them arriving at the incident. Work with local authorities, London Resilience Forum, etc. And there's some other recommendations there as well. I don't need to ask you about. What I do want to ask you about is, did the DSE's delay in arriving at the scene affect your plan or knowledge regarding the stability of the building?
No, it didn't. And the reason for that is because whilst we have a DSA system which is useful in some aspects, my experience at more extreme incidents is that even the best dangerous structural engineers are coming from a building control and building construction background, and therefore no reasonable dangerous structural engineer is going to tell me that it was all right to put people into that building. They simply won't make that call. It always reverts to our professional judgment on the basis of our own understanding of building construction. They're likely to offer some specifics about how long a material structure might last, what the possible effects of firing it might be. Although, again, I have to say, my experience of dangerous structural engineers at incidents is inconsistent, because some will be able to offer some judgment on that, some will actually refuse to offer judgment on that, and others will actually be well informed. It's very much a kind of mixed bag in terms of the information you get. There's not, I would suggest, a particularly consistent standard in terms of the information we receive from DSEs at times. I think it's a system that could be improved actually for the benefit of firefighters and officers as a general point. And I think that's really what the thrust of that is about.
Okay. You expressed, I think, some scepticism, is that the right word there? But just looking at your own experience on the night, if I could just show you two things in your log. Page 5, first of all, under the time mark of 0613, we can see that the DSE is there. DSE District Surveyor. It's 613. DSE District Surveyor could not get high enough. No floor collapse, pancake, frame building, max fire resistance 4 hours, FF shaft 2 hours. If columns spoil, not saying will collapse. If no people, let it burn. And we talked about plans earlier. And then if you go on to the bottom of page 6, a later meeting at 7:13, TCM, which is introduced by you, 3 entries up from the bottom. John Allen, District Surveyor, confirms superstructure will not come down, other parts, corners, slabs will drop down. It looks from this as though John Allen did give you a pretty unambiguous piece of advice about structural integrity. Is that fair?
I think that's a summarisation of a more complex conversation. So he was not as definite as to say slabs will drop down. No, he just said there was a very real possibility it might happen. Right. But I'd been alive to that possibility from the moment I'd taken the incident over, actually. Right. So it was just a continual professional judgment as to how we were going to continue to commit crews into the building, and also how we were going to use information from the crews themselves. So I think there's a reference in one of my statements to some generic information coming back from use of thermal image cameras, so understanding the ambient temperature of walls and structures as to whether that might lead us to believe that there was a degrading of the concrete. I mean, that is a very subjective call, but that, after all, is what I get paid, my wage for. I suppose that's our decision, because we're prepared to operate in a situation is perhaps more risk-laden than a district surveyor is going to. Right. And they're not going to give us the assurance that we would necessarily want, because, to be fair to them, it's not their profession. And I think that's the essential kind of tension between the advice that DSEs sometimes give you. It's focused very much on sort of building site safety. Well, at the point where you've had the numbers of people trapped inside the building that I had and our crews had, and the extent of fire spread, I fully accepted that there was the potential for partial collapse. It was just a continuous judgment as to how close we were to that, based on my own experience, my own understanding of building construction, the advice from someone like Dave O'Neill, our safety officer, very, very experienced urban search and rescue operative, the lead for technical rescue in the brigade, years of working with DSEs, understanding the effects of catastrophic collapse, and having those conversations. My experience of DSEs is, and is rightly so, is that they're invariably cautious, because that is the nature of their work. But that's not always helpful to us, because I was making decisions in a different context, which is I was balancing, I suppose, at a strategic decision-making level, I was balancing the human rights of those people inside the tower against the human rights of my own people. And what the decision I'd come to was that the people inside the tower because they didn't have PPE, were not expecting the situation they were in, had no training as to how they would try to resolve that situation, were a greater priority at times than my own people, I'm afraid. So whilst they were also of the greatest priority to me in terms of wanting to ensure I didn't, risk them in an unmanaged, unconsidered way, actually because they did have PPE, they did have training, and because we have a duty as a public authority to support that part of the Human Rights Act, I felt I was justified in taking that decision, particularly because it's enshrined as part of our statutory duties. And also there's further guidance in documents such as the HSC's document, Heroism in the Fire Service, which accepts that at times we may compromise the human rights of our own people to protect those of the public in a perilous situation.
Yes. Mr. Rowe, thank you. I have one more question for you, at least at this stage, and it's this. Looking back on the night and the period during which you attended as incident commander, is there any aspect of the brigade's response to this fire that if you could go back and change, you would?
At that point in time, no, because I think there is always room in big organisations for improvement to systems, to improve training. I think there's always room for improvement to the underlying conditions in which our people operate. But actually, in terms of the response of the night, I could not have been prouder to be a London firefighter, nor lead the men and women of the London Fire Brigade, because I felt that they operated in the best traditions of our 150-year history and put themselves at enormous risk for hour after hour after hour, and that we were battling against what was frankly an absolute failure of the building system, and that they had done their absolute best in intolerable circumstances. I have nothing but praise for my junior officers and my crews, who performed well beyond what was acceptable in terms of their physical and mental capacity, and actually in some numbers have paid the price consequently. It was a privilege to lead them, and I'm very proud of what they did.
Mr. Rowe, I have no further questions for you. That isn't to say that there won't be any further questions for you, which I might consider over a short break, which I'm going to ask the Chairman for now. But subject to that, thank you very much. Mr. Chairman?
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Well, we will have a short break now, Mr. Rowe, because sometimes further questions emerge. So we'll come back at 10 to 4, and then we'll see whether there are further things that we need to ask you. In the meantime, if you'd like to go with the usher, she'll look after you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good, 10 to 4, please. A few questions.
Just a
Mr.
few,
Millett?
Mr. Chairman, in the usual way.
Well, I think just a few more questions.
So,
Yes, Mr. Millett.
Mr. Rowe, I'll keep these as brief as I can. Fire lift. We looked at that very shortly before we rose just now, and I just want to go back. There were one or two questions I did want to ask you. Did you know from the time you took over command that the lift key for the lift, the fireman's lift key, had never worked or didn't work on the night?
I didn't know the detail of why the fire lift wasn't working, but I was told categorically that the fire lift was not in operation and was not working.
Right. And therefore couldn't be subjected to firefighter control.
I didn't know the specifics of why we didn't have control of the lift. I was just told that the lift couldn't be operated in the way we wanted to. It wasn't in operation.
Right. If it wasn't working in the sense that it couldn't be brought under firefighter control, would you have expected crews to take steps, or what steps they could, to disable the lift so that it couldn't be used by residents?
No, I'm not sure I would have done, but because they weren't using it. But ideally, we would want to secure the lift, and also I'm not aware of the nature of that building and where the lift motor room was. So I have to say, actually, it's not something I've considered.
Right. As a matter of practice, as at the night, coming back to that's where we started yesterday, it seems a long time ago now, as a matter of practice, would it be your experience that where a firefighter arrived at a high-rise block and found that the fire lift, or firefighter's lift, depending on which it was, wasn't capable of being brought under control, they would isolate it so that it couldn't be used by residents?
No, I wouldn't expect that, because actually, if we're not going to use it because we can't bring it under control, then actually I wouldn't seek to deny that necessarily to a resident. It depends on the nature of the incident itself. Now, something like Grenfell, where every floor is alight, I suppose you could have considered that, because it may well be that you didn't want a resident to step into the lift and then come out into an environment that wasn't safe for them. So that could have been a consideration. Other incidents, if you're unable to control it, generally we don't want people to use lifts at all in terms of evacuation or leaving the building. We want them to use the stairs because that is the safest, most controlled way of doing it. I wouldn't necessarily expect a firefighter to go and then isolate that lift as a task. No.
You wouldn't?
No.
Right. And in this particular case, one of the difficulties we've got is that the lifts weren't brought under control, and that had certain consequences. The question is as a matter of safety, in your experience, was it not better to keep the lifts out of the control of residents so that they didn't find themselves in a lift and expelled into a floor filled with smoke?
I have to say I've never been in a situation where the use of the lift would have had that effect, and it hadn't been a consideration to me prior to you stating it now.
Right. Okay. Different topic. Were you aware during the course of the night, now I know this is a point of detail, but let's see if I can prompt a recollection. Were you aware during the course of the night that there was a surviving occupant who'd come down from the 22nd floor after 3 a.m?
Is this the gentleman we eventually rescued at 8:25 in the morning?
No, it's somebody who came down after 3 a.m. from flat 193 without any BA or without any protective equipment. Is that something you knew on the night?
No, because that's why I asked the question, because the only real bit of detail I hold is the last person we brought out, which I think, pardon me, was at 8:25 in the morning.
Yeah. Were you aware that FSG callers had been calling on several occasions, but up to 2 hours into the fire, they hadn't yet been rescued? Were you aware of waiting times of that magnitude?
I wasn't aware of the detail of it, but that does not surprise me at all, because it would have been dependent on their location and our ability to reach the floors. So I wouldn't say that surprises me, no. I think that's, again, a reflection of the extreme nature of the situation we found ourselves in.
Right. So it wouldn't surprise you. Can I just ask you about the ability to rescue people from the roof? And this question I'm asking you just to allay any public suspicion about it. Did you ever consider evacuating residents from the roof?
What, by use of helicopter?
At all?
No, because I think it would have been impossible without the use of a helicopter. So in a non-fire scenario, actually having been head of technical rescue, I did quite a lot of work with the Marine Coast Guard Agency and Coast Guard rescue helicopters. So it's within the capability, using our contacts pan London, to call in an MCA search and rescue helicopter, and you would be able to take people off a roof if you needed to. Actually, they've got that capability to do it in the London airspace. It would take some time for them to arrive because they're coming from the coast. But in the context of Grenfell, although I considered it because I felt it was reasonable to consider it as a resource that we had, I was fairly certain we were never going to be able to use it because of the effects of downdraft on the fire. Actually, the difficulty of the rescuer being on a winch, potentially going down into a very hazard environment, what I would judge to be the difficulty of the pilot to judge the products of combustion and the likely effect it might have on the airframe. There were lots of reasons why I just don't think that was a viable rescue option. I just don't think rescuing anyone from the roof was, viable.
If I just follow that up a little bit, if I may, just briefly. If you go to page 12 of your first witness statement, you say at 5:40, Mick Mulholland came back to the unit, and then halfway down the paragraph, you say, I considered the possibility of requesting Maritime and Coast Guard Agency search and rescue, HELLO support, as London does not have a winch rescue capability. My reservations with this option were the 45-minute minimum arrival time and the possible effect of downdraft on the fire whilst we had so many people trapped and firefighters inside. And what prompted you at that time, 5:40 hours, to consider the possibility of requesting a helicopter rescue?
Because if I did have people on the roof, I was prepared to consider anything, again, as a possible resource. So it's about getting things moving. My sense was that I was never going to use it, but being told that we had, at that point, there was information that we had people trapped on the roof of the building. I considered the possibility. I rang up Dan Daly. So this prompted a phone call to Dan Daly, right, who was the AC then holding AC1 cover because Richard Mills had gone to the Lambeth operations room of the Metropolitan Police. And I said that I needed a message passed into SOR, so that operations room, where the request for helo support would be made, just to warm them up to the possibility. Because if we were going to use them, if I took the decision that we could use them, obviously you wanted them alive to the possibility we needed them, and therefore they were ready to go.
Right.
That was my sole consideration there. I rang Dan, I told him that we might want them, warm them up, and then very quickly discounted it.
Discounted it because?
Because I think the effect on the fire would have been profound with the downdraft. I didn't think it was a tenable rescue methodology, right, because of the risk to the rescuer and also because of the way that the building was engulfed in flame, frankly.
And what would it have taken to rescue people from the top floors or the roof?
We'd have had to get firefighters up onto the roof and bring them down through the internal staircase.
Right. No other
there
way.
was no other method. No, again, so as the lead for technical rescue in the brigade, we could have considered some use of line rescue, but you're not able to use line rescue, so rope rescue, effectively, in a heat and smoke, in a hot environment, because they're nylon ropes and they're going to melt. And obviously, there's no way of bringing them down the outside of the building in an environment where most of the outside of the building is alight. Mm. So the only two options available to me were either rescue from above, which is helo, search and rescue helicopter, which I'd seen used and had helped plan the use of major floodings outside of London. So I understood it quite well as a capability. Or bring them down the internal staircase. Neither one of those were particularly viable options. I felt fairly, anxious about the fact that we had people on the roof, to be frank, when Tom told me. So I thought that was going to be almost impossible to resolve.
Yeah. You say that the downdraft was the problem, and was it that eventually ultimately made you discount the rescue by helicopter?
I think it's a combination of all the factors. So the effect of downdraft and not really being able to quantify what effect that would have on the fire and our crews and the residents that might be left in there. So it'd be very hard to judge what the downdraft would do if you were then winching, someone down. So in proximity to winch someone down to affect a number of rescues, you are going to get that. They produce a considerable downdraft. I think the fact that I also thought, having seen that system in use, actually it was going to be almost impossible to put someone on the end of a winch to get someone out, let alone, effectively dropping a line into a fire environment. There was just too many impracticabilities to overcome. So there was lots of reasons why I would discount it.
Okay. Finally, gas supply. Can I just take you to your first statement, which we're still in, and go to page 17? In the middle of the page there, you refer to the National Grid presenting at the CU having been requested as part of the major incident. And that's at or after 8:10. And if we go to the row log at page 7, just at the foot of the page, you can see in the second entry, Codon Gas, former National Grid, that should be Cadent, I think, Gas, will isolate 3 separate locations that will isolate building, Grenfell Tower, one other building. Question is, what steps did you take to secure the attendance of Cadent before that?
I knew that the attendance of the utilities had been requested because I think Andy O'Loughlin had briefed me to that effect, that he had requested the attendance of the utility companies. I felt that there was likely to be gas supply involved in the building, but it wasn't a priority, in the first part of the incident to chase that. It wasn't my top priority. My main priority was the overall kind of fire, really. But it was something I was going to have to come to. I think that was chased on more than one occasion in terms of their ETA.
Right.
Again, I can't be sure of that. It would have been something, because it's a matter of course. It's a process thing that all officers in command are likely to want to know about, to request, to chase if they haven't attended.
Yes.
But that is fairly consistent with my experience of utilities attending.
Yeah. What, that they don't turn up
Well, no, they do,
time.
but it can take some time, because obviously they're not a blue light service, and they will need to identify a team that has the skills to be able to isolate supply, particularly in something like the context of Grenfell, where it's not going to be as simple as just isolating a single domestic supply or something to a small building. No, it didn't particularly surprise me.
No, okay. Well, we can look at the short incident log and find numerous entries for that as we go. That's a matter of record. Just going back to your statement, in the last sentence in that same paragraph, you say, I was sure burning gas supplies in the flats were adding to the difficulties for firefighters. At what point in the night did you learn or come to realise that burning gas supplies in the flats was causing difficulties for firefighters?
To be frank, I'd made that assumption fairly early on myself, because my experience of these blocks is there very often a gas supply in them. I actually had it in my head that it may have been one of the factors as to the fire spread, that something had become involved. I can't remember exactly when, but I think I'd had some reports back that there was likely to have been involvement of gas supply. So actually it would have been one of the things that I would have considered very early on, because of the nature that, it had been one of many variables in relation to fire spread and the ferocity of the fire, and actually some of our difficulties in extinguishing the fire at times. So I felt with the level of destruction that was being visited on the building, I would have been entirely surprised if all of the utilities, electric and gas, hadn't been involved in some way.
Right, okay. And just in terms of the difficulties for firefighters, what difficulties are those that gas presented?
Well, they're difficult to extinguish because it continues to burn. It's not just a simple task, just putting it out with a jet of water.
Yeah. Yes, I see. Okay. Anything else? Right. Mr. Rowe, thank you very much. Those are all my questions, all my extra questions that I had. I think it just remains for me to thank you very much for your patience in answering my questions. I've kept you there a long time. I'm very grateful to you for coming to the inquiry and assisting us with our investigations. So thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
And on behalf of the inquiry, I'd like to thank you very much as well. I'm sure you are only too well aware how important your evidence is for us. And we're very grateful to you for coming along and giving it, I'm afraid, at rather great lengths, but you understand that can't sometimes be avoided. But thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, sir.
And now you're free to go.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, that's the business for the day.
Yes.
We now have the Commissioner tomorrow, and I'm not going to ask you to sit at 9:30. 10 o'clock should do it.
Good. Very good. Well, in that case, we'll break now and resume at 10 o'clock tomorrow. And look forward to hearing from the Commissioner then.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you very much. 10 o'clock tomorrow, please. Thank you.